Much for the interview. The names are Stephen Karangizi. I am currently a senior advisor for the Coalition for Dialogue on Africa, which is a high-level institution established by the African Union for dealing with topical issues for Africa. Previously, I was the Chief Executive Officer of the African Legal Support Facility, which is hosted by the African Development Bank. And apart from advising African countries in negotiating major commercial agreements, that particular institution also was advising on illicit financial flows, particularly asset recovery. I'm from Uganda, so currently advising CoDA, the Coalition for Dialogue on Africa. So the issue for discussion, which we've just discussed at this particular conference, which is absolutely important, on illicit financial flow, is of very great importance to Africa because many studies have been undertaken which have shown that actually more resources flow out of Africa than Africa actually receives. Everybody knows most of our African governments cannot balance their budget from revenue collection, internal revenue collection. So on average, they are able to raise only about 50 to 60% of the revenue they need to meet their budgetary requirements: health, education, defense, and running government and other aspects and so on. So they usually mobilize about 40% from donors. So an important aspect of domestic resource mobilization is how to stop illicit financial flow of resources out of Africa. Illicit financial flow of resources flows from proceeds of crime, which includes corruption, of course, proceeds of resources that are lost through illicit practices of commercial enterprises in Africa, particularly natural resources and other investors. So it's absolutely important to focus on it so that we find ways in which we can mitigate that illicit financial flow of resources. So the first thing that the high-level panel did was to generate a comprehensive report. I'm sure you've heard about the report in 2015 adopted by the AU Summit, which then made recommendations as to what needs to be done. The high-level panel set up a working group for dealing with, first of all, asset recovery. So I am actually on that working group. I'm a member of that team of the working group, and that was the first action of the high-level panel. So we are now in what we would call the implementation stage. The implementation stage includes continued advocacy to African countries to know how much they are losing, how they can stop those losses, and how they can recover the assets which have been remitted outside the continent. So those actions include, for instance, strengthening our taxation systems so that fewer of the resources are lost, for instance, through natural resource investments, and also having more efficient taxation systems. Then secondly, having mechanisms in which assets that are relocated outside the continent can be recovered. This does not only include liquid assets, finance and so on, but also includes non-liquid assets. For instance, those who use the assets to buy buildings and cultural assets, like cultural artifacts. So the panel has put in place this working group to recover those assets. We are now developing a framework for their recovery. One of the things we are doing with the framework is trying to develop agreements that can be concluded between African governments and regional bodies such as the European Union and many others that can facilitate the recovery, identification and recovery of those assets. Those countries, we need their cooperation to recover those assets. So that's what we are currently doing. We hope that that framework with agreements, and also putting in place an escrow account where those recovered assets can be put before they are distributed to the countries where they originated is ongoing. We hope it will be adopted by the African Union Summit, hopefully in Assembly of Heads of States, hopefully next year. So that Common African Position on Asset Recovery, which is part of what the high-level panel is doing through the working group on that asset recovery, is absolutely important because, first of all, it increases awareness that countries have assets out there. Then it will increase on cooperation between African states. It's easier for African states to speak with one voice when recovering those assets rather than just one country. And then thirdly, it also puts in place, it will put in place mechanisms in which the assets, once recovered, can be managed. And of course, above all, a clear understanding of what needs to be done to recover those assets. The one and most important message is that African countries need to strengthen their institutions and laws against corruption to prevent the outflow of our resources outside the continent. And secondly, they need to strengthen their taxation systems and make sure that all avenues for leakage of tax revenues are closed so that the resources are kept on the continent. And I think that one message is that we have enough resources, we just need to know how to manage them better and limit their outflow better for the development of our continent. Thank you.